Okay, so we're now going to look at the two Holy Thursday poems of Blake, and let's start with the Innocents version. Holy Thursday, of course, describes a very special occasion that happened once a year in London when the local orphanages, the orphans, would be trooped to the great church of St Paul's Cathedral for a special service once a year. And they'd be accompanied by the beadles, the people who would sort of manage and control the orphanages, okay? We have to remind ourselves there's a great deal of poverty in Blake's London, and I don't know, I mean, those of you who've seen the film Oliver or read Oliver Twist or something you have a strong idea there of what the workhouses were like, what the orphanages were like. And the question, I suppose, that Blake asks us is, what are we supposed to think of the people who are running these orphanages? I mean, to what extent are they driven by pure feelings of charity and goodness and perhaps Christianity, if we're looking at the dominant religion of the period? Or to what extent are they doing it for their own personal gain? Or indeed, what do we think of a society in which these orphanages and these orphans exist, where there are so many of these poor children? This poem in Innocents is an extremely interesting one to look at, in that on the surface it's very positive and very cheerful and a very benign, a very kindly vision of this service that was happening. But perhaps if we pick up on some of the ambiguities that there are in some of the language, we might suspect that there's something a little bit darker going on underneath. So it's a very good poem to use if you want to argue the case that the Innocents, many people, I mean, one critic who exemplifies this is Professor Zachary Leader, who argues that the Innocents poems are very straightforward and very simple. And many other people would say, well, that's not entirely the case. I mean, some of them are a little bit more subtle and more complex than perhaps that would suggest. Okay, so we'll have a look at that. It begins like a ballad. I mean, Blake, as we know, often uses familiar working class forms like hymns and nursery rhymes. And in this case, the sort of ballad that you might hear in a pub or in a marketplace, sung by somebody to earn a little bit of money. 'Twas on a holy Thursday, their innocent faces clean. I mean, that 'twas on a holy Thursday, very typical ballad opening. The actual rhythms, it's mostly iambic, da-dum, 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 the unstressed and stressed syllable beat, okay, of the syllables. With some dactyls here and there, dum-da-da, dum-da-da. But it has a sort of jaunty, sort of rollicking, sort of ballad-like feel to it. Look at the lexis that describes the children. Their innocent faces clean, these adjectives suggesting purity and what the children are like. Walking two and two, I mean, many people pick up on the reference to Noah's Ark there. Noah's Ark in the Bible, of course, being a classical image of protection, of being saved, an image of salvation, really. And perhaps, if we take it on a surface level, we could say, well, the children here are being saved from poverty, are being saved from possible death, I suppose, on the streets of London if they're not being looked after. So that is then picked up with these colours, red and blue and green, the compounding there, the repetition of and, very childlike in some ways. Red, blue, green, these bright colours, perhaps picking up the idea of the flowers that we have later on. So some people see this as a very cheery sort of image. Other people if we're looking at the ambiguity there, say it's an image of control, 2 and 2, red and blue and green. It's very ordered. The beetles are the men in charge of them, grey-headed, wands as white as snow. I mean, again, on a positive level, they seem wise, they seem kindly. The word wands suggests something almost spiritual, druidic in some ways, although we have to remind ourselves that the wands are actually the staffs or the sticks that they bear. And of course the sticks, almost like canes, are like an image of control, perhaps. They flow into the cathedral like Thames waters, again this image of nature, okay, like the great force of the Thames running through London. The children are like the river, they're like the flowers of London town, these natural images. And that sense of joy is picked up in the second stanza, this joyous exclamatory, "Oh, what a multitude they seemed." That word multitude is picked up again and again, multitudes, okay. And it is a word that is used in the Bible to describe angels, multitudes of heavenly angels. So on that level, perhaps it links with words like radiance, okay? The idea that these children are angelic, are being compared to angels in the Bible. On the other hand, the word multitude sort of just means there's a lot of them. And so maybe if we're looking at the darker side, Blake is saying to us, look how many of them there are. This is a terrible, terrible problem. Thousands of little boys and girls. Their comparison with lambs, again, perhaps picking up the innocence of these natural references, flowers and the waters of the river, okay. But again, lambs, we're reminded of religious sacrifice, the sacrifice of lambs, the story of Abraham and Isaac, Christ himself being sacrificed, okay. So perhaps these children are being presented in some way as sacrificial victims, if we want to look at the darker undertones of the poem. Now, like a mighty wind, well, again, this natural image. We've had the Thames's waters, we've had the flowers, we've had lambs, now we've got a wind. He's describing here the song that they're singing, this great hymn that they're singing as part of the service. And it's almost like the seats of heaven, it's like all the angels and the saints in heaven can hear the great sound of this hymn, like harmonious thundering, this wonderful hymn that they're singing. The aged men, again the beetles, their controllers, here described as wise guardians. The preposition beneath them, some people see that as saying the beetles are serving the children, are looking after the children, they're below them. And we end with the last line then, cherish pity lest you drive an angel from your door. Again, a biblical allusion, the idea that I think it was Christ himself who said, be good to the lowest of the low because it might be me. Don't turn a beggar away. It might be me. And this is an image that occurs in lots of different religions, the idea that you should show charity because it could be God in disguise, and so you will get your reward or your punishment depending on how you treat people who are in need of help. Then cherish pity lest you drive an angel from your door. Let's now, it sounds a little bit like a sermon, I think that. It's like a homily, a sort of moral message. So we're left with the idea, is this a positive and a kindly and a cheerful and an entirely sort of good image of charity? Or is there a sort of dark, are there hints of a sort of darker undertow to it? Well, if we turn to the the corresponding poem, Holy Thursday, in Experience, it couldn't be more different. I mean, I think of all Blake's poems, this is the most explicitly political of all the songs of Innocence and Experience. This is almost like a political polemic, Polemic. A polemic is like a very strong argument or a strong speech on a feeling very strongly on one side of a political viewpoint. Okay, it's a list of questions, almost like a list of rhetorical questions. It has an impassioned tone. It's almost like a political speech. It's the same event, remember, but being described in a completely different way. Is this a holy thing to see in a rich and fruitful land? Well, the rich and fruitful land, of course, is Britain, and those adjectives sum up Britain at this period. It was the richest country on the planet at the time. It was a place that was very rich and very fruitful. The harvests were good. Fed with cold and usurious hands. Here the children are described as babes reduced to misery. Here the beadles are described as cold and usurious. Usurious has the idea of getting something to your own advantage. Getting interest. Is the implication here that people are charitable because it's self-serving? It does them good. Is that trembling cry a song? Remember that it was a harmonious thunderings. It was a great mighty wind. It was a wonderful hymn in the first poem. Here it couldn't be more different. It's like a feeble trembling cry, as if these children haven't got the energy. They're so hungry. They're so ill. Haven't got the energy to sing joyfully. All of these questions. Can it be a song of joy? And so many children poor. And this exclamation, it is a land of poverty. Well, he's being ironic here, of course. Britain was not a land of poverty. Look at it's almost like a political speech. And you can almost hear the speaker thumping the desk, almost making a political speech. There's lots of references to nature here, but very negative references to nature. This is nature which is bleak. This is nature which is sort of not fruitful. The sun doesn't shine, the fields are bare, the ways are filled with thorns. Well, of course, this is exactly not what Britain is like. Of course the sun shines in Britain. The fields are very fruitful. The harvests can be very good. People were making a lot of money out of the land. It is eternal winter there. Well, it almost sounds to me like sort of Narnia or something here. It's like a hyperbolic and exaggerated vision of what the country is like. And of course any reader of the time would know, well, this isn't what Britain is like. And of course that's the point. It's a political, it's rhetorical. He's using irony to say, well, how come these poor children can exist in such a rich country? It's a poem about the distribution of wealth in a way. It's a poem which is attacking those with money for hanging on to their money, for exploiting the poor to make more money. Wherever the sun shines, wherever the rain falls, well, of course, that's here, that's Britain. You could never find a hungry child. Well, of course, there are thousands of hungry children in this country at the period, nor poverty the mind appall. Well, Blake often uses the word appall to capture that sense of outrage. And I think this whole poem, it's all about outrage, a sense of disbelief, a sense of utter anger at the system in this country which allows such a dichotomy, such a discrepancy between the rich and the poor. And we might ask ourselves, people often say, is Blake still relevant today? Well, you think for yourselves, can we apply this poem to the world today?